This video is titled, Why I Believe Math Gives Incredibly Convincing Evidence for the Existence of God. Now, this is a presentation that the Lord gave me back in July of 2024, and it started as just a small note and then expanded until it became this entire thing. Now, this is something that's really exciting to me, and I want to share it. And I have it in written format, but I don't really know if anyone's ever going to read it if I leave it that way. So I kind of hate doing videos or things like this, but I thought maybe I'll just read it and then people can follow along if they're interested in learning about what the Lord has shown me and some of these things that I have discovered. Now, getting into this presentation, it's all about, one, math, of course, but precise language, definitions, and assertions. So I'm going to be taking a lot of terms and defining them and exploring sort of this new framework of looking at things. It's not new, but this framework of looking at things that is very, very precise. Even in the title of this presentation, I'm stating that I'm giving evidence for the existence of God. Incredibly convincing evidence at that, but the reason it's not proof for the existence of God is that there is no belief system that can be proved with hard, concrete evidence 100%. Now, I can give really convincing, practical, factual evidence or arguments, but whether you believe in evolution, you're an atheist, you're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're a Buddhist, there's an element of faith in what you believe, and you can't 100% prove it with just facts. No one can do it with anything that they believe. No one. And so again, even with the title, I'm being very precise with this language. And I'm just really excited to get into this argument. It's really logic-based. It's not super math-heavy, but I find it very exciting and interesting and really creates a unique framework for looking at some things. And I make some interesting challenges. So we'll get there. All right, but let's just dive in. I want to start with this quote that I wrote. I thought it was interesting. It came to me, and so I'll share. It says, "Nothingness is never ending, yet also never beginning. It is an empty void, vast yet claustrophobic. In nothingness, you can get infinitely lost, yet always know where you are. Nothingness is simultaneously everything, yet also nothing." So, just kind of an interesting, fun quote. Really has nothing important with it, but all right, let's go. So, why I believe math gives incredibly convincing evidence for the existence of God. Now, we're going to be looking at a series of proofs. The main ones are division of zero, division by zero, and zero divided by zero. And then I have this fun little quote that says, "Everything really is all ones and zeros." And that's another, there is some talk of the binary and this sort of universal binary system that there is. That's actually another work I've written that I look forward to sharing, but this is what we're going to be focusing on, as well as really nailing down some definitions and assertions being made. So let's go. Now, what is zero? Zero in concept is commonly referred to and defined as nothing. While this interpretation of zero is not entirely false, it's not very precise. Nothing is not something that actually exists. In theory, the idea of nothingness exists, but in our reality, it does not and cannot. There has always been and will always be something preventing nothingness from ever existing on its own. The best way to accurately define zero is as the absence of something. Okay, the absence of something. Zero is the numeric placeholder for something's absence, but it does not represent nothingness. In order to have zero of something, the something must exist. It is true that I can have 0 apples, but the apple must exist in order to have 0 of them. I cannot just have 0 without the attachment of object or subject. Okay, this is true. So, the absence of something will be the definition of 0 for the duration of this proof. And nothing or nothingness will only be used to refer to the abstract concept of absolute nothingness. So what is that concept? Is it real? Does it exist? Could absolute nothing exist? In short, the answer is no, it's impossible. It can't exist on its own. Zero can't stand alone. However, the idea of absolute nothingness is a fallacy, an oxymoron, and a logical impossibility all at once. So here's why. Absolute nothingness is not the absence of everything. This is the proof. Absolute nothingness is not the absence of everything. While it's true that the concept of absolute nothingness may technically be absent of everything, it is not the absence of everything, it is the absence of anything, aka the absence of a something. Everything is not a singular term, and absolute nothingness is the absence of a singular thing. For only one thing added to absolute nothingness would nullify absolute nothingness. So absolute nothingness is not the absence of many things. It is absent of a single thing. I repeat myself a lot. It's how I write. We're just going to keep going. So what is the singular thing it is absent of? That's a great question. Now, going back, for example, 0 oranges is the absence of a singular thing, the orange. For 0 oranges does not equal the absence of all fruits. The same logic applies for 0 in any context, including the context of absolute nothingness. 0 equals the absence of the singular something. Okay? If absolute nothingness is absent of a singular thing, this presents the logic that the single thing it is absent of is the source of everything. I explore this later, okay? It is the one of all things, the something that allows an absence to exist at all, for you cannot have 0 without 1, okay? Now this is huge. This is really, really big, right? Like if there was this all-expansive void, that there was no one around to perceive it, there just was nothingness, right? This could only exist as the 0 to the singular thing of all things that are now, right? Because I'm here right now. You're here watching this video, okay? So there is something, right? So in order for there to be an all-expansive absolute nothingness, endless void, no one around to perceive it, if that truth could exist, then it would need to be absent of a singular something of all things. It's not absent of many things outside of it. There would only be one thing outside of it if it did exist. So what would that one thing be? Because that one thing that it is absence of, that is the absence of, whatever, it is the source of everything. That singular thing is the source of all things. Okay, that's very fascinating. So maybe chew on this presentation. I get into it more. Ready? This is even better. Okay? In summary, to claim absolute nothingness could or did exist is an oxymoron. For the existence of absolute nothingness itself would confirm the existence of the singular thing it is absent of. Okay? It's similar to stating there is no absolute truth. For the statement asserts itself as an absolute truth, contradicting the meaning of the statement in the nature of its very own existence. Meaning, if there was no absolute truth, this itself would confirm there is absolute truth. It is the same cyclical reality when pondering the possibility / existence of absolute nothingness. If there is absolute nothingness, there is a singular something it is absent of, confirming the existence of a something, negating the possibility of the existence of absolute nothingness. 0 is always absent of something. 0 as absolute nothingness is imaginary, right? It's still absent of the singular source of all things. So anyway, chew on that. Very fascinating. But let's get into the proofs, right? We've got our definitions set. I've set kind of a foundation of thinking. Pause it, think on it if you need to. But now we're going to jump into why I believe math gives incredibly convincing evidence for the existence of God. First discussion point, 0 to the power of 0. 0 to the power of 0 equals 1. This is just a truth in mathematics, okay? This means if you have the absence of something and exponentially expand it by something's absence, what you have is 1, or the something. This concept of exponential growth, right, when we put a number to the power of another number, can be looked at in two ways, as moving inward or moving outward. Exponential growth can occur in the form of an object or subject that is being multiplied or duplicated into infinite duplications or versions of itself, which is outward, or in the form of a subject being broken down into infinite sections or pieces of itself, which would be inward. Right, so like cutting something up endlessly into infinite sections by an exponential number, or multiplying that thing outward. Okay, we get it. So to conceptualize this, let's look at 3 to the power of 2, which equals 9. 3 pieces broken into 3 equal pieces of itself gives us 9 pieces. Okay, equally, 3 pieces each multiplied into 3 more pieces gives us 9 total pieces. There's an example of inward and outward. Therefore, 0 to the power of 0 means the absence of something could be simultaneously collapsing into itself or multiplying outward. Which that's interesting because it sounds like descriptions kind of like the Big Bang, right? An implosion and an explosion happening simultaneously. Very fascinating. All right, anyway. Therefore, if you have the absence of something brought to the power of the absence of something, you are multiplying the something's absence by its absence. This is conceptually similar to multiplying two negatives. Absence multiplied by absence should give us a presence, okay? Look at it this way. If I have no oranges and multiply it by no oranges, well, what do I have? I have no oranges. But the statement of 0 to the power of 0 implies there is something to be had, and that is oranges, right? The something is inherent when posing this question or problem. So rather than confirming the quantity of oranges, 0 to the power of 0 inherently affirms the existence of oranges to begin with. For the absence of its absence is the something's presence, and this something is 1. In other words, the reason that any number to the 0 power is 1 is because any number to the 0 power is just the product of no numbers at all, which is the multiplicative identity. I can't say that word, but we can read it, can't we? The multiplicative identity of 1. In this case, the identity of 1 is equivalent to the existence of orange as a thing, as an individual and quantifiable subject to which a numeric value can be assigned and calculated. So that's what 0 to the power of 0 shows us. It shows us that there is the existence of a something that can be quantified and calculated. It is the 1. All right. So how does 0 to the power of 0 point to God's existence? If I have the absence of something or anything and expand it or break it down into its infinite absence, I'm still left with 1. I'm left with the something, right? If you have infinite nothingness and expand it into infinite nothingness, then you're left with 1, with something. Okay, this confirms what we said about absolute nothingness, right? If you had absolute nothingness, which is endlessly expanding or collapsing, right? It's just a void, right? So if you have it expanding infinitely into nothingness or shrinking infinitely into nothingness, you're still left with 1, with something. Okay, and I get to something kind of interesting here, but we'll see. Therefore, this logically proves that even in order to have never-ending, all-expansive nothingness, breaking apart and or expanding into nothingness, you still imply the existence of something. You imply the existence of 1. So what is the 1 or the something? Maybe the 1 or the something simply represents nothingness itself, being the something that it is. Although the fact that I'm here to perceive this matter is contrary to that conclusion. However, the assumption that nothingness in itself is a something is correct and will aid our understanding moving forward. Now, this is really interesting to what we defined with absolute nothingness, right? It's this idea that absolute nothingness itself could be something. Maybe the absolute nothingness that it is 1, is something, right? But that doesn't work. It's still a 0. It's still nothing, right? It's still absent. It's void. So the idea, though, that it itself can be considered as something is true because that confirms the cyclical reality that is absent of the singular thing, right? That it can exist, it just can't exist by itself. Absolute nothingness can't be technically absolute because it's so absent of a singular thing. But the idea of this endless void is real only in the attachment of the singular source of all things. Okay, we're going to keep going. All right, so second discussion point, which is division of 0. What does this mean? It means that 0 divided by any number always leaves you with 0. If you have the absence of something divided or even multiplied by any quantifiable number, this still leaves you with that something's absence, no matter the number it is being divided by. Thus, if you start with absence, it is impossible to create something out of it, either in multiplication, outward, or division, inward. Example, if I have 0 bananas and I split them into 5 groups, how many bananas are in each group? 0. 5 groups can still exist, which is that number that it was being split by, but each group is void of anything. In other words, if absence is the point of origination, or just the point of origin, then nothing can ever be derived or multiplied from this. If you begin with no quantifiable amount of something, this something will always remain absent unless there is an additive. 0 divided by anything is 0. This one is much simpler. Okay, so how does 0 divided by anything point to God's existence? If the world began with the absence of something, nothing could ever be created from it. Nothing can be derived from the absence of something or anything. Not even nothingness itself can be derived. Only the something's absence can be derived. For only the something's absence can never exist, but even this still implies something of preceding existence. This explanation is almost an oxymoron. Even if the world were to begin with 0, the absence of something, or absolute nothingness, then 0 already implies the existence of something. It does not imply nothingness. Okay? So even if we began with everything's absent, everything's gone, there's nothing, right? This itself implies a 1. Absence always implies a something. All to say, if the creation of the world started with something's absence, no expansion or growth could ever come from it. Absence would be all there is, reiterating the idea that absence or nothingness cannot be an origination point. This is typically the only point people focus on when you're talking about 0 and proving God. This is the thing that they cling to, which this is strong enough evidence, I would say, by itself. But there's so much more to this. This is so much more expansive. So this is one of the points, one of the more digestible, easy to chew points. Let's go to my third. All right. My third discussion point is division by 0. All right. What does this mean? Well, anything, or x, divided by 0 is undefined. It means that division by 0 is a mathematical impossibility. You can't define it. You can't do it. But why? But why? So yeah, why is it impossible? Just as it is impossible to derive something from that something's absence, as we just discussed, equally, it is impossible to create something's absence through the process of division. The process of division must derive from a source, and if there is a present source, it can never be eliminated by fracturing. And division cannot force something's absence by removing the presence of time and or space it exists in. Okay? So a number divided by 0 asserts these two things that are impossible. All right? It asserts that I can have a quantifiable amount of something and split it into 0 groups, eliminating its existence, is what that means. Or I can have a quantifiable amount of something and there is 0 of it in an unknown number of groups. Meaning I turn that number into nothingness by splitting it into groups. Let me just read what I have written. If something is split into 0 groups, then the something would be absent. And if something is absent, 0, then there is no number of groups it could be split into. The something would no longer be quantifiable because 1. There would be no amount to be quantified, or 2. No place for it to exist or be, or 3. It would have to exist in non-existent absent places. That doesn't work. Division by zero is like making something poof into thin air or turning it into nothing by breaking it apart. It's doing those things. It's either making it go poof or it's breaking it apart until it's nothing, which you can't do either of those things. We can't just make things disappear and go nowhere, and we can't divide by zero. Example. I like fruits. If I have 5 apples, I can never break down those apples into absolute nothingness or into zero. It's impossible. Even if I divide my 5 apples by 1 billion, we just end up with millions of microscopic pieces of apple, but I will never arrive at its absence. I also can't just remove the space in which my apples exist, taking them from one group and putting them into absent groups. That's what that would be. The apples themselves would have to be absent to be put into absent groups, but this would contradict the current presence of my 5 apples. That's what I started with in this example. Okay, and their inherent need to exist in a given time and space. That's just asserted, that's inherent. Thus, I cannot mathematically create absence 0 by division. So then, what happens if I divide 0 by 0? We're going to do that later, that's really important. But yeah, let's keep going. Come on. Okay, so in summary, I've said this a few times, but I'm going to say it again. I try to be super thorough, okay? Division by zero attempts to create the absence of something by asserting the idea that you can eliminate the existence of something by splitting it / fracturing it, or by simply removing the ability for it to exist in time / space. Neither of these assertions are logically or mathematically possible. 1. Something cannot be placed into zero groups, space-time removal from the object. That literally, like, I cannot just remove space and time from an object, right? I can remove an object from a space or from a time, right? But I cannot remove space-time from the object. It doesn't work that way. It's backwards. Okay. 2, something cannot be quantified as 0 in an unknown number of groups. That would be the endless fracturing, dividing to derive an absence, right? Because if I have a quantifiable amount and I got to put it in 0 groups, that means I got to eliminate it by somehow splitting it apart into these. My bad. Not putting it into 0 groups, but I'd be putting it in an unknown number of groups, because that's what the equation would be solving, is how many groups can it go in if I'm going to divide it up till it's nothing. So that number would just get big, right? As close to 0 as possible, but we're never going to get to 0. We're going to get real close to 0 because we can go to infinity, but we can't get to 0 no matter what. So therefore, you cannot divide by 0. That's why it's undefined, just like logically. So how does x divided by 0 point to God's existence? All right. When one attempts to derive something from something's absence, which is discussion point 2, you are plainly left with its absence. And if one attempts to derive absence from something, you are faced with an impossibility. So with this notion, not only would it be illogical to believe everything in the universe came from absence, discussion point 2, but in a reverse manner, it is also illogical to believe complete absence, nothingness, could or ever did exist. There must always be and have been something. I cannot take all things and put them into 0 groups. And I cannot take all things, quantify them as 0, and attempt to discover how many divisions would make this possible. For no quantifiable number can make this possible. It cannot be. This is kind of what I was just saying. So this is true because there currently is something. And the something that is everything can never be broken down, divided, into the absence of everything or absolute nothingness, right? No matter if I took everything that's in the world and I made it explode and set bombs off, right? It's just going to rip everything apart. But it's not going to like get rid of anything. It's just going to change the structure of everything. But it's still all there. All the stuff, all the things is there. The matter is there. Just in different forms. Okay, yeah. So everything can never be broken down into the absence of everything. And the space-time in which everything exists cannot be turned into absence, right? I can't just get rid of space-time. I can't just poof everything away. There's no time, there's no space, nothing is. That's pretty much it on this one. So the impossibility to solve x divided by 0 asserts that there always has been something is something and will be the existence of something. So there always has been something, there always is something, and there always will be something is kind of what x divided by 0 asserts. And that's how God describes himself. He is the beginning, the middle, the end, and the end. Okay? He is, right? Like, you can't say it more simply than that. He is, okay? He's outside of time. He's beyond the timeline, right? Okay. So this brings me back to conclude that the something that is, will be, has been, is the singular source of all things, the one of the universe, right? This connects to the previous points. We'll keep going. In summary, discussion point 1, the rule of 0 to the power of 0. This is the absence of something exponentially expanded or broken down into its absence inherently implies the existence of this something that is to be had. Infinite expansion or infinite reduction leaves us with 1, aka the source, aka the something. Discussion point 2. 0 divided by x. If you begin with no quantifiable amount of something's absence, the something will always remain absent unless there is an additive. Discussion point 3. The rule of x divided by 0. In this case, division by 0 attempts to use division to create the absence of something by asserting the idea that you can have a subject and eliminate the existence of that subject by splitting it or dividing it. You cannot break something into groups of 0, nor can you remove something from existence by removing the place where it dwells. 0 groups equals 0 places to exist. So you can't have an unknown number of groups of 0 if you have a quantity, and you can't put a quantity into 0 groups, because that means you're putting it nowhere. So you're taking it out of space-time. Okay. Thus, working in reverse to discussion point 2, since things currently exist, the absence of all those things is not possible because you cannot just remove the places of their existence, and you can't just make them poof, right? Okay. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Now we are going to dive into some of the meat of this, and that's 0 divided by 0, and what that means. So, my final discussion point, I'm just going to tell you now, just cut to the chase, 0 divided by 0 equals 1. Now, the questions though that we have to ask is 0 divided by 0 undefined? Is it 1 or is it 0? Because our proofs from before say it could be any 3 of those things. Math, right now, like mainstream math, whatever, would just say it's undefined. We don't know. But I'm arguing that you can actually come to a conclusion based on logic, reason, that asserts that 0 divided by 0 is 1. So yeah, that's kind of what this slide says. Now, how we do this, how we look at this in a logical way, is we have to figure out what the zeros in 0 divided by 0 represent. The first question at hand, is to find out what they represent, meaning, could the numeric value of the zeros be absolute nothingness, which is a theory, or do the zeros remain to be defined as numeric placeholders and represent the absence of something? These are both concepts of 0, the former theoretical and the latter practical, but both are inherently different in their mathematical assumptions. So let's look at the numerator, the first 0 in the equation, and let's see what that 0 represents. What does 0 represent as the numerator? X divided by 0 functions as a proof that can be used to analyze the meaning of the numerator in 0 divided by 0. If the numerator in 0 divided by 0 represents the absence of something, then that something's absence can be referred to as x. For our proof of x divided by 0, x has a value of 0. However, it is proven that there is something, and we attempt to divide it by 0. We run into an impossibility. Let me say that again. However, it is proven that if there is something and we attempt to divide it by 0, we run into an impossibility, as previously discussed. Anything divided by 0 is impossible because it attempts to assert the denominator as being absence, when a denominator must represent a numeric value of quantity. This is a truth asserted by the act of division. So I didn't touch on this in my beforehand, but it's true. Division inherently implies that there is something to be split apart or multiplied into a certain amount of numeric sets. However, this impossibility is only true when we try to divide something by the absence of something. Therefore, it may be possible to solve 0 divided by 0 if the numerator represents absolute nothingness, in place of representing the absence of something. Theoretically, 0, as the numerator, could represent absolute nothingness, and the nothingness it represents in itself is something. Simply the something it would be the only thing that is. Now, this is like going back to those first slides that I had, where I talked about stating the statement of there is no absolute truth, and how that statement itself is an absolute truth. Okay, let me get back into this. So, therefore, the numerator in 0 divided by 0 cannot represent the absence of something because the origination of something cannot be absence. Although, if 0 is representative of absolute nothingness, it simultaneously embodies the concept of 0. It still has the qualities of 0. It's still 0, right? Nothingness. With the nothingness it is being something, okay? Also implying the 1. It's 0 and 1 at the same time, right? Kind of confusing, but it still holds that value of 0, right? I'm not changing my equation. It's still 0 divided by 0. So it is nothing and something all at once, and thus it theoretically can be divided. Thus, the only viable option to define the equation, so it may potentially be solved, is for 0 in the numerator to represent the concept of absolute nothingness instead of the absence of something. This is the only definition of 0 in the equation that does not contradict the equation itself. For the act of division inherently implies the existence of something. Absence cannot be the origin, right? So I cannot start with just, it's the absence of something, right? I can't start there, right? Can't be. So we're saying that this starts, the root to the beginning is absolute nothingness, and we're going to divide that by 0. And I have this little note, this little footnote. I have a little one. It says, the notion of dividing is to deduce, to derive, or to take from. From implies an origination or a starting point. Thus, dividing inherently in the action always and must imply an origination, or something to deduct from. Although our origination point can never be the absence of something, 0, for only nothing can be derived from this. Thus, the numerator must represent something, and in this case, the something it is nothingness. So, interesting. Okay, now we must look at the denominator, the second 0 in the equation. If it is to represent the absence of something, then it can be represented with the equation of 0 divided by x, the something being x and the value quantity being 0 of that x. However, our proof states that 0 divided by x equals 0. This is because the essence or origination of something can never be something's absence and still produce something. So if there is no additive, absence is the only thing that can remain regardless of the quantitative value of the denominator. This, in part, confirms the idea that the numerator must represent absolute nothingness and not something's absence, for the something that the denominator is attempting to derive is absolute nothingness, and absolute nothingness is a something with the mathematical value of 0, but therefore we can attempt to derive from it. Okay, therefore, the numerator represents absolute nothingness, and absolute nothingness is a something to be had in itself. So its quantifiable value is 0, but its logical value is 1, right? Again, this is like what I was explaining before. For it is the something to be had. It is the only something. While the denominator continues to represent the absence of something, as it must represent the quantifiable divisions or iterations of the numerator. It must represent numeric value for the act of division to be true. The denominator cannot equal absolute nothingness, for absolute nothingness can only ever hold the value of 0 or arguably 1. It can't be anything else. Thus, in the case of 0 divided by 0, the numerator equals absolute nothingness, and the denominator equals the absence of something. Equally, the 0 in the denominator equals the absence of something, and the something is defined by the numerator because it is the thing to be derived from. The denominator is never the definer of the something. It is only representative of quantified sections, parts, pieces. And in the case of 0 divided by 0, it turns out that the defined something, the numerator, is nothingness, absolute nothingness. So if 0 equals the absence of something, then in the case of 0 divided by 0, 0 in the denominator equals the absence of nothingness. Although, what is the absence of nothingness? The absence of nothing is something. And what did we just define the something as? Well, the something is nothingness. Therefore, if the numerator equals nothingness, the nothingness it is a something, the only something, the one of all the ones. Therefore, 0 equals 1 in this context. And if the denominator equals the absence of nothing, then this means the denominator actually represents something, and the something it is nothingness. Therefore, we have nothingness divided by nothingness, the same term divided by the same term, 1 divided by 1. Therefore, the most logical conclusion is that 0 divided by 0 equals 1, not undefined. So, how does 0 divided by 0 equals 1 point to God's existence? If it can be argued, in fact, that 0 divided by 0 is 1, this points to the existence of a creator similarly to the way that 0 to the power of 0 equals 1 points to a creator. If the universe was nothingness and was divided further into nothingness, it would produce something. Truly, I don't think we are capable of comprehending such a thing, for we are unable to comprehend absolute nothingness because it is a contradiction in itself, okay? However, it seems logical to me that the one or the something that this act of division would produce would be the predecessor of nothingness, right? The one that makes the absolute nothingness possible, right? The singular one, all right? The predecessor of nothingness, so that nothingness can be, so that absence can be, there needed to be a something. Okay, if we took nothingness, and nothingness was all that was, and we divided it by its very absence, we would likely arrive at its essence or origination. Hence, the one of all things, the one from which originates 0. 0 originates from 1, okay? The something from which nothingness or the concept of absence originates. Yeah, I said that. Okay. This is the very something that allows us to perceive the nothing that we are currently discussing. Because we're here talking about it. We're something, right? Thus, 1 is technically the origination of 0. It is the predecessor of 0, establishing the inherent idea that absolute nothingness cannot exist on its own in the first place. In order for there to be 0, there must also be 1. So what is the one that precedes nothing? I would claim the Creator, Almighty God, Yahweh. So then, what is the one of our universe? Because everything is of this source. So that's for you guys to decide. I'm a Christian, so I have my beliefs. Other people might draw their own conclusions about what the one of the universe is, but I think maybe I can't prove Yahweh, I can't prove Jesus with this, but with this presentation, what I think I do prove is that there is a singular source of everything that is, the to be of all things, right? The is of the world. And everything comes from that source, including nothingness. So we didn't start from 0, we started from the 1, and from the 1 came the 0. And that's what starts the binary system, which is embedded into everything in our universe, which is the next, I guess, video I want to make. I don't want to make the video, to be honest, but I wrote it and I'm going to make a video about it, so maybe some people will see it and read it, whatever. So anyway, thank you if you watched this and you stayed for this whole time. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I think I do have a few more slides. Actually, so I'll just dive into that real quick and then I'm going to be all done. So, all right. So I decided to just do a voiceover for this last slide because I rambled. And this final slide is just a proof of 0 divided by 0 equaling 1 and how I arrived to that conclusion and just explained in the most simple, easy to understand form possible, all in one slide. So Here we go. If 0 equals absolute nothingness, then 0 divided by 0 is equivalent to absolute nothingness divided by the absence of absolute nothingness. This is because the denominator must represent the number of quantifiable divisions of the defined numerator. The number in this case is 0, thus absence of the defined numerator. The numerator is defined as absolute nothingness. The number of that nothingness it's absent. It's 0 of it, right? So we have the absence of absolute nothingness. Okay. But the absence of absolute nothingness is something. The absence of absence is something, right? So then we have absolute nothingness divided by something. The only something to be defined in the scenario of absolute nothingness existing is nothingness. It is the something, it is the nothing. So absence of nothing takes us to something, but the something it is nothing. Thus, we arrive at absolute nothingness divided by absolute nothingness. Back at 0 divided by 0, but this can be rewritten as something divided by something because it is both. Okay, the only something to be had, nothingness, divided by itself. Thus, we can make this equivalent to something divided by something, which is 1 divided by 1, which is equal to 1. So essentially, 0 divided by 0 is the same as 1 divided by 1, meaning the existence of 0 is quantified as 1, right? The existence of 0 in the case of absolute nothingness is quantified as 1. Therefore, 1 must always precede 0, and 0 must always be dependent on the preceding existence of 1. It can't stand by itself. For even the nothingness 0 could represent can be quantified, which is the idea that absolute nothingness is also a something. So again, this is sort of a circular type argument, but that's because the idea of absolute nothingness has a cyclical nature to it. So that's the proof. Enjoy, take a screenshot if you want, and I hope you liked the video. Thank you.